This is a gachapon, also known as gacha or gashapon here in Japan. The way it works is pretty simple. You put money in a machine, you rotate the lever, and then you get this kind of capsule with an item inside. The tricky part is that you never know what kind of item you're gonna find inside the capsule. There is a degree of randomness involved in these machines, so that the output is never fully predictable by the customer. A Dragon Ball gacha, for example, will contain an action figure from Dragon Ball. However, we cannot know with precision which character we're specifically going to get. This kind of mechanics in recent years has expanded beyond the realm of physical action figures and toys, and has become widely adopted in virtual environments and specifically in video games. Indeed, if you play video games, you're probably familiar with terms such as that of loot boxes. Loot boxes are generally defined as consumable virtual items which can be redeemed to receive a randomized selection of further virtual items. In simple terms, with loot boxes you don't directly purchase an item as you would normally do. Just like in Japanese gashapon, with loot boxes you buy a ticket to participate in a lottery. A random reward mechanism is involved in the selection of the item, so that you never exactly know what you're going to receive in the end. The similarity with gashapon is so evident that in Japan loot boxes are actually referred to as gacha. But the one with gashapon is not the only comparison drawn. Researchers, experts and gamers have all stressed that loot boxes actually resemble something else. They are similar to gambling. Due to this similarity, the term loot box itself seemed to have gained a negative connotation in recent years. It's not surprising then that when at a recent hearing organized by the British House of Commons, the representative of EA Games was asked whether they considered or not loot boxes as an ethical feature of their video games, she began her answer by claiming,
"Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes.
The correct term used by EA Games would in fact be that of
what we look at as surprise mechanics.
Surprise mechanics.
That this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises. And so it's something that's been part of toys for years, whether it's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or LOL Surprise.
This answer has been target of a lot of criticism within the gaming community, where loot boxes are often perceived as unethical, predatory forms of monetization.
We're gonna keep calling glorified gambling because that's what that is, because no matter how much horseshit you spout, EA, gambling will always be gambling.
We seem to see two very different positions taking place. Loot boxes as surprise toys on the one hand, and loot boxes as gambling on the other. This leads us to a further question. Gambling is highly regulated in many countries. Determining whether loot boxes are gambling or not would have huge legal consequences in the current gaming market. Yet several countries have given very different answers to this specific question, and there seems to be no consensus on this topic. So, are loot boxes a form of gambling? And why is it so difficult to answer this specific question? Loot boxes seem to have become almost ubiquitous in these very last few years. Loot boxes are not only one of the major forms of monetizations in free-to-play video games, but their popularity seems to have been also growing among premium titles where players have to spend about $60 upfront just to play the game. It doesn't come as a surprise that players have often negatively reacted to them.
And this is a loot box, and today I want to talk to you about these fucking things. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what's in here. Oh look! It's horse shit!
Indeed, several academic papers have investigated the phenomenon of loot boxes in the last few years, and most of them seem to be interested in exploring their relation to gambling. So, are loot boxes gambling? I think the best answer at the moment has been given by this paper, published by two researchers from the IT University of Copenhagen, and the answer is... it depends. I know that this answer sounds a bit lame, but let me explain more in detail. The term loot box as we use it in our daily life is quite ambiguous. It is not in fact 100% clear what we mean by loot box and loot boxes. Several different kinds of reward mechanisms seem to fall under this terminology. Indeed, the authors suggest that rather than using the term loot boxes, a more appropriate concept would be that of random reward mechanisms. Now, there are several implementations of random reward mechanisms in video games. We can, however, describe their general structure, dividing them in three different components. First of all, an eligibility condition, which is the condition that let players participate in the random reward mechanism. Secondly, a random selection procedure. This is the algorithm that determines the reward. And finally, a reward. If we think about them in such abstract terms, random reward mechanisms are not particularly new. Several implementations of random reward mechanisms can be in fact seen in video games that well predates the emergence of free-to-play video games. And randomness per se has always played a fundamental role in video game design. Think about the items that you can get by killing a monster in Final Fantasy, for example, or in many other RPGs. The reward is often random, or at least unpredictable by the player. What's really new about the loot box phenomenon of recent years is the explicit celebration of randomness provided by the adoption of gambling-related representation. Developers have tried to stress that random equals fun. Interestingly, this is also what the representative of EA Games is apparently stressing in her answer on the ethical status of loot boxes. The idea that she's trying to defend is that loot boxes are good because they are fun and people like being surprised.
These kind of mechanics, and FIFA of course is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun, enjoyable to people.
Here I'm directly quoting the article. Newer implementations of random reward mechanisms accentuate randomness by using easily recognizable tropes such as spinning wheels, dice shaking sound, shuffling, packs of collectible cards openings, etc., etc. It can be argued that this ostentatious glorification of randomness represents a genuinely new trend in video games. The crucial difference between earlier implementation of random reward mechanisms and this new trend is that while older games celebrated reward player got, the newer ones celebrate the random procedure itself. These kinds of representations might be problematic in arousing players' expectations, no doubt. However, in themselves they are not enough to support the idea that random reward mechanisms are gambling. But this of course depends on what we mean by gambling, which ultimately varies depending on the country. A typical legal definition that you would find, for example, in the United States on what gambling is would say that gambling is the wagering of money or something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome with the primary intent of winning money or material goods. If indeed we accept this definition, we must conclude that not every kind of random reward mechanism is gambling. To make this clear, let's go back to the three different components of random reward mechanism: eligibility condition, random selection, and reward. The first distinction that we need to make in order to determine whether a random reward mechanism is gambling or not is based on the eligibility condition. The question is the random reward mechanism activated by monetary investment or not? The second distinction depends on the kind of reward. The question here is the reward a valuable good? Can the reward be transformed into money? Now that we have made these two distinctions, we can roughly divide random reward mechanism in four different categories. The first category of random reward mechanism is that of reward mechanism where no money is needed to access the reward mechanism itself, and where there is no possibility of selling the items that players get as a reward. This is the most common form of reward mechanism. A good example would be that of daily rewards, a kind of reward that is very popular in mobile games and that can be accessed just by logging into the game. The second category is that of reward mechanism where no money is needed to access the reward mechanism, but where it is possible to sell or exchange the item that players get as a reward. This is the case of the auction house of Diablo 3, where players were able to trade and sell virtual items obtained while playing the game. The third category is that of random reward mechanism, where money is necessary or needed to participate in the reward mechanism, but where it is not possible to sell the item that players get as a reward. This is the case of Star Wars Battlefront 2, where players pay money to access a random reward mechanism, but where the items obtained cannot be traded for real money outside the game. The last category is that of random reward mechanisms, where money is needed to access the reward mechanism and where it is possible ultimately to sell the item that players get as a reward. This is the case of Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Not only players pay money to access a random reward mechanism, but they can also trade the items obtained for real money. This is our taxonomy of random reward mechanisms. If gambling is the wagering of money or something of value, we can safely exclude the first two different categories of random reward mechanisms, since they do not involve the use of money. However, what about the other two categories? According to the authors, one of the fundamental characteristics of gambling is that it generates what they call chasing. Chasing is a behavior where losses are sought to be recuperated by either more gambling, creating a devastating economic result. Following such concept, it becomes fruitful not only to distinguish between games that allow the player to spend money and games that do not allow players to spend money, but also to distinguish between games that allow players to withdraw money or virtual items that can be translated into other currencies. According to the authors, the Danish Gambling Authority does not consider loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront 2 to be gambling because the content of these loot boxes cannot easily be exchanged for money, whereas skin betting in Counter-Strike Global Offensive is considered gambling because the skins can quite easily be changed into currency. Moreover, if you accept the definition of gambling as the wagering of money or something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome, with a primary intent of winning money or material goods, we implicitly accept the idea that receiving a material good in reward is a necessary condition of gambling. In other words, random reward mechanisms that provide rewards that cannot be exchanged into money or any other valuable goods outside the game are not gambling. Among the four categories that we have seen, only the last one seems to fit the definition of gambling. But there is a plot twist here. Not every country adopts or accepts this definition of gambling. In Japan, for example, the Supreme Court has established that in order to be gambling, both the parties involved in the activity, in the betting, in the wagering, have to be exposed to the risk of a loss, of a monetary loss. To put it in simple terms, gambling is a zero-sum game. When someone wins, someone else has to lose. In other words, both parties have to be able to lose money, which is obviously not true in the case of random reward mechanisms, where game providers are not exposed to the risk of losing anything at all. This indeed is a crucial difference which is often overlooked between loot boxes and other kinds of gambling activities. Even with slot machines, which are designed to generate profit in the long run, the provider of a slot machine might lose money on the single bet. In video games, this never happens. Rewards are always virtual entities, and giving them to the player does never represent a loss for the game provider. So, to conclude, are loot boxes gambling? According to a broad definition of gambling, it might be said that only specific cases of loot boxes actually are gambling. However, if we follow a narrower definition, such as the Japanese one for example, then the answer is no. Loot boxes are not gambling. However, the question is another one. Does this mean that they are ethical? No, it doesn't. We tend to compare loot boxes to gambling because we believe that gambling is an unethical activity. However, the truth is that not every form of gambling is unethical, and that many forms of random reward mechanism of loot boxes, despite not being legally gambling, may have a very negative impact on the life of individual players. Many random reward mechanisms are not gambling, but often borrow the design and the aesthetic of gambling machines. In order to engage into an effective critique of loot boxes, it's mandatory that we first understand what's wrong with them. Thanks for watching. See you next time.